Hello, Mr. Miskey, and welcome to my assignment 1 video. For my assignment 1 video, I decided to make a blackjack game. Basically, it's a very simple blackjack game where you try and get your hand to total as close to 21 without going over, and the closest person that comes to going to 21 without going over wins the round. You can play multiple rounds, of course. To start with, of course, I have to make a card class. I'll talk about this implements comparable card in a second, but to start with, it had the basic fields: a suit, a card, basic constructor, get methods, set methods. Here's something that's quite interesting that I liked quite a bit is figuring out the sprite of the card. Every time I want to figure out the sprite of a certain card, what I do is that I have a get sprite method. There is an image of a deck in the deck class that looks like this. Every time the getSprite method is called, it takes the parameters from the implied object, locates that card in this file, because it's nicely gridded, it can do that, and that becomes the sprite for your card. Moving on to my deck class. The deck is the full deck of cards that any normal card game is played with. I used an array list to define my deck, because at any given point in the game, you don't know how many cards there are in the deck. So since array lists are a dynamic data structure, I decided to use them. I also had the file that I mentioned earlier, the playing card deck.png, which is the picture of all of the cards. Also, this is just something that converts it into a buffered image. Also, these are static methods, because every time a new deck is created, it should be creating the sprites for those decks from the same deck, if you know what I mean. Like, it shouldn't be creating. If these weren't static, you would have to construct, and you would have to pass the constructor a file for that it needs to construct every single time. Every time a deck is constructed, it pulls from the same file, if that makes sense. I have a better example of it in the hand class coming up in just a second. This is the constructor for the deck here. The deal method shuffles the deck, returns one card from the deck and removes it from the deck. Also, it does it completely randomly, just like a true card game should do. My shuffle method is quite interesting also. What it does is that it takes a random number it picks two random spots in the deck and switches them. Two random cards in the deck and switches them. And it does this anywhere between 52 to 103 times. And since it does it so many times and so randomly, the shuffle method always comes out truly in a almost truly random manner. Moving on to my hand class over here. A hand, again, is just an array list of cards. At any given time, the size of a hand is unknown, so array list was the best possible data structure to use there. Also, there's a boolean that says if the hand is bust or not, saying that if the total is 21 or under or not. Also, I said here there's a better example of the static field. Basically, a hand has a static deck in it, static deck field in it. What that basically means is that every time a hand is constructed, all the hands are constructed from the same deck. There's only one deck for each of the hands. And that makes sense because in a game of blackjack, you only want to play using one deck. And since there's, well, it depends on how many players you have, but for the purposes of my game, you can only have a maximum of 10 players, and for that you only need one deck. So that's exactly what I meant by static there. Since this method is static here, I have to make sure that the deck isn't null when I construct a hand, so that it isn't trying to pull like cards from a null deck. I have my getters and setters. I have my 2-string for testing purposes, my hit method, which adds a card to the deck if it's possible. My yeah, I should probably talk about this. My sort method. What it basically does is that it converts the array list of cards to an array, and then it uses arrays.sort, and then it returns and then converts it back to an array list. Usually, you aren't able to use arrays.sort on just any array, because not all arrays are comparable. That's when I go back to my thing over here, and I said I added a chunk of code called the implements comparable. Now, implements comparable is a chunk of code that has the arrays.sort method in it. But for that to work, you have to have a compare2 method in your card class over here. I have a compare2 method. It's a very basic compare2 method. Positive if implied is greater than past, negative if implied is lesser than past, and 0 when the cards are the same. So basically, it uses the implements is a chunk of code that I would like to use with my card class, but even though it's not a subclass of it, it's kind of like hierarchies, but you're as in you're inheriting code, but it isn't an is-a relationship, like hierarchies are. So yeah, that's how my sorting algorithm works. This is my find sum algorithm. I was particularly proud of this one because I had to make sure that aces I had to figure out a way to make sure that aces could count as 1s and 11s, depending on which total was better for the user. I figured that out using an ace counter and this algorithm right here. My set deck method. These are my computer intelligence algorithms, which basically every time a player is added to the game, every time a computer player is added to the game, it can randomly choose from one of these algorithms to play its game. So it can either play very safely, in a risky manner, or in a very risky manner. Yeah, so that's how the computers play it. Moving on to my frame. I could talk about my frame and all of its methods, but I believe it's just better to show you what my frame looks like. This is my frame right here. I have 2 J buttons called the hit and stay methods, a text area over here with a scroll bar that I spent so much time on trying to figure out, and a JText area. A J panel here that displays the cards when you start playing. I followed your GUI videos and was able to create one like this. I set the fonts, I added action listeners, added a scroll bar, and added my get and set methods. My print method just slowly prints the text to the screen for dramatic effect, like that. My show hand method is something I'm particularly proud of. I start with creating these finals for the size and increments between cards. If the programmer wants, he can change these when if he has this code. But basically, what it does is that it takes the hand and then it creates an array list of points. Now, what a point is, the point class in Java just has two fields, an x and a y coordinate, just like, a point. And what it does is that it parses through the hand and decides and labels a point where each card is supposed to go. And then what it does is that it parses through the hand once more, grabs the sprite for each and every card in the hand, and places it in the point that it determined earlier. And each of those cards is a new J label. So this for example, over here, it figured out when I got this hand, it first parsed through the hand, calculated that the card should start here, the second card should start here, and if I had a third card, it should start there, and went through the hand and pulled each and every one of the sprites and placed it at the corresponding point. I thought I was pretty impressed with that one there. It took me a while. Moving on to my game GUI. This is my runner class. My main. What it does is that it constructs the board, prints the instructions for the first time, a counter just to say how many times you've played, and just a while loop to make sure you can play multiple times. So it constructs a new deck, shuffles the deck, it sets the deck for the hands, and yes, instead of actually going through this, I can just show it to you. So when I hit run, it generates the frame, prints out these instructions to the screen, and if you press hit, it'll enter the while loop. It'll ask you how many players you want to add. You can add as many players as you like. Well, you can add up to 10 players. You can play with them, and you can use this. You can just play blackjack like you would any other time, and you can play multiple times, of course. So yeah, Mr. Miski, that's pretty much it. So that was my assignment 1 video. I really hoped you liked it, and look forward to. I can't wait till you actually go through the code. I'd like to see what you think. Thank you, Mr. Miski.